Even attend the dance.
How much?
Capital difference.
Just all
Okay.
that.
I heard it was
So
a big
much
success.
socializing. Especially now as like the president, you have to like.
Congratulations. I heard about the money.
Oh, money was great.
Very proud of you guys.
That $200 a head.
100. We have 100 teams. Yeah. Not
Can you
bad.
sell those easily?
Mm-hmm. Yep, they sold out. We had a wait list. And then we had an auction.
Well, there's the
Oh,
money.
yeah.
I know.
Because like it's promised. And when you have a paddle, that
Good evening and welcome to the Traverse City Planning Commission's study session of Tuesday, April 18, 2023. This meeting is being a study session. There will be no action taken tonight. We will have discussion on housing variety proposals, and we'll look forward to a robust discussion on that topic. This meeting is called to order. A roll call, please.
Commissioner Hassing?
Here.
Commissioner Hershey?
Here.
Commissioner Shaw?
Here.
Commissioner Duturi?
here.
Commissioner Cheller?
Here.
Commissioner Colbert?
Here.
Commissioner Knapp?
Here.
Commissioner Arnold?
Here.
The commissioners who are not in attendance today are Commissioner Martin and Commissioner Treadwell.
Thank you very much. Are there any announcements?
Yeah, the only one I have for now is that for the master plan, we'll be having some focus area design workshops, or one workshop rather, held on April 26th from 4 to 6 p.m. at Hickory Hills. We'll be looking at different areas that the master plan process has identified for focused redevelopment and going over some design build scenarios with the public.
Excellent. April 26th. Okay, on to our topics for discussion. Presentation and discussion on the draft story map outlining the Planning Commission's goals related to expanding housing opportunities. For introduction, Mr. Winter.
Yeah, thank you. The planning department staff worked on this last week and the week prior, so we want to take the opportunity to go over it with you, kind of explain it, show you how it works, see if you had any questions, errors, things like that. So I'll start with how you can find it. If you go to government under appointed boards, and this is more for the public since you guys have the link already, and you can come to Planning Commission, we now have a link since this is part of your goals sitting right here. So that is accessible. It's also in the Bay Brief that was sent out on Friday. So one thing I want to point out about this, it is best viewed on a computer than a mobile device. Some of the maps and stuff don't work as well, and it does drain batteries very fast, I found. So just kind of note that. So this story map was put together to kind of create an overall narrative of your housing goals and provide some context of what is being, pursued through your 6 points that, of course, were part of your annual goals last year and have carried over to today. And what we're really talking about is creating community opportunity through housing variety. This isn't a discussion on affordable housing. This is on options for housing, variety in the housing stock. So as you scroll through this story map, once you get past the title page, you'll notice that we have a navigation bar that gets docked at the top. So these are the defined sections. So if there's one that you want to go to, we know it's quite lengthy, you can just click on one of them and go right to that section. So again, we're talking about the supply of housing in Traverse City. We know that the need remains high, especially for housing that's convenient to one's daily needs. When it comes to housing, there are many layers and levers that affect the amount of housing and the pricing of housing. However, land use regulations that dictate the types of housing and where it can be built, those are levers that the Planning Commission and the City Commission have direct control over. So these are the tools that are being focused on at this time. So the other thing is we're really looking at small-scale zoning changes, not widespread changes that are going to completely change the character of the neighborhoods or community, but opportunities to infill within the city in a way that fits the context of the existing neighborhoods. And one of the benefits about this is that by creating these new housing opportunities, we're helping increase one's ability to reduce their carbon footprint. Because when one can live close to their daily needs, they're going to be more likely or able or have better access to walking and biking to those needs, cutting down on the total dependence of automobile for your day-to-day activities, which again, of course, is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. So I've heard people sometimes really rally for climate action, and at the same time speak against housing. Housing is a solution or part of the puzzle for addressing climate. And of course, another consideration that we've heard at some of our meetings in the past is housing is tied to the economy. Our employers are having a hard time at all income levels, all industry sectors, obtaining and retaining talent in our area. And the number one reason that they always point to is the lack of attainable housing. So what do we mean by housing options? Well, there's a term that was coined a number of years ago that we'll be using quite a bit throughout here, and that's called missing middle housing. And what that typically is referring to is this spectrum of housing that falls between exclusive single families detached housing, which is one of the most expensive types of housing, and very high density multifamily residential. So this missing middle can come in a whole variety of different designs and densities, which we'll be looking at today. And what's important, again, is that these can exist at options and at a scale that fit with our existing community and neighborhood. So every image you see on there is 2 or more families per unit within our existing neighborhoods in Traverse City. So we'll go ahead and define some of these a little better. Well, before we get to that, I just want to, again, reiterate that this is not about addressing a specific price point. We're not trying to hit a certain AMI through this. We're just providing more housing options that themselves, with their variety, may offer different price points. And by allowing them to come online, where now we prohibit them, hopefully our supply will go up to better match demand. So those examples I was referencing, one would be duplexes. So this is when you have a single building designed for the occupancy of 2 family units living in 2 separate dwelling units. So then naturally triplexes is the same concept, except it's 3 families living separately in 3 units. And then quadplexes is the same, but with 4. So 4 families and 4 separate units. Accessory dwelling units are what people are probably most familiar with because we've allowed those for some time here. So we have them throughout the city. This is a smaller unit on the same property, either attached or detached, that's accessory to the principal dwelling on the property. Cluster housing is an option that we have currently that allows the siting of housing to be done in a little more creative way to either protect natural resources or to create some common areas. So another name for cluster housing that may be familiar to some is cottage court, or what's real popular in California is what they call bungalow courts, so little bungalows situated with a common lawn area. Next, we have row houses. So here, they're also known as townhomes, but these are individual single-family units, but they share a common wall between each unit. And then next, we're going to get on to housing goals and objectives. So currently in the Traverse City Master Plan, which was created in 2009 and updated in 2017, there's a call for providing housing variety. That is something that we don't expect to change through this next master plan. In fact, the draft chapter is already out. It's already calling for more housing variety. We have heard people say, well, wait till the master plan comes out before you do this. Well, this is a problem that's been going on for years and years and years, and there's no indication that without addressing it now that any relief is going to come. Plus, the city isn't beholden to only addressing things in its master plan. So we've put these buttons on here. You can read the current master plan as well as the draft housing chapter. So you click on these, they will open up in a new tab and eventually load, and then you can go through and read all those in there. Some really good data in the draft housing chapter. Next, we have the Homes for Our Futures campaign. I believe it was in 2021, the City Commission passed a resolution of support of Housing North's Homes for Our Future campaign. If you read through this, the preambulatory clauses throughout this document explain and touch on the need for these types of solutions, and then put forth the resolution that the city is committed to creating new housing options throughout the city. In 2022, the City Commission worked on adopting their strategic priorities, goals, and actions that created 6 strategic priorities, which included housing and homelessness as a high priority issue. It further identified the need for a community with housing for all, with the stated goal of increasing housing opportunities for more diverse housing. And then, of course, the Planning Commission's goals, you're most familiar with those. Those bullet points from 22 and 23 are right there. We're not going to go over them now because they're going to be addressed in the proposed solutions. And now, moving on to other considerations. So, what are some of the consequences for the lack of attainable housing? Well, when people don't have housing choices, that can create a lot of angst in their life. I've heard stories of people that have lost their house because it was a duplex in a commercial district and they were able to use one of the units as a short-term rental, and so the property owner decided to do that. Now they're without a house. It's a really tough environment to find a place to live out there, and when you can't have options available to you, this may result in people having to relocate to different communities to find housing that's within their means, or even just available, period. That means an employer may lose an employee in an already tight labor market, and it means that the social ties that that individual has with their community, the familiarity of their daily routine, all of that gets disrupted, all because we can't have options when these type of events come up. The next we have is economic instability. We have mentioned earlier in this discussion that they are having a really hard time attracting and retaining new employees. So many of our service fields, so when the jobs that we rely on, people working in dry cleaning, working in offices and things like that, those jobs go unfulfilled. They can't meet the operational demand that the economy is placing on them because they can't house enough employees to fill those positions. I think what's even more important, and we heard this from our city HR director a few weeks ago, is that really essential positions like firefighters and police officers, those are going unfulfilled. You heard the story, or unfilled rather, sorry. You heard the story, I think it was just Chief Tuller saying how you would get like 100 applicants sometimes for positions or whatever the number is, and we've had 6 positions open for over a year now and just not getting them filled. So appreciate you sharing those perspectives there. And this is the same thing for teachers and nurses and things like that. And of course, one of the consequences is financial instability. So the U.S. Census Bureau defines house cost burden as someone who is spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing and housing-related expenses, so utilities, taxes, things like that. When someone's in a situation where they're spending more than that, what they're unable to do as a result is save for their future, for their financial, or for their retirement, for their financial stability and independence. It also makes it really hard for people that are renting to ever save enough money to where they can put down the money necessary for a down payment. And home ownership is one of the main ways of creating generational wealth in this country. And of course, just having options that meet different needs. People's housing needs change over time. And when we can't provide those options or make them available, we're essentially forcing those people to be displaced. So as someone goes from, as we look here, a young person, their housing needs are really dependent on their parents, but it's nice to live close to school and be able to walk and live near your friends. You have the needs of college students as they're working real tight, possibly going to NMC, young professionals emerging into the workplace. The needs of younger families, and of course older families, and as it's becoming more common in our country, people are taking in older relatives and caring for them and housing them as they become older. And then of course aging in place, ensuring that there's an option so when you get to the point where maybe you don't need that whole house, you can find something in your neighborhood within your community that you have established without having to move out of the community as your only viable alternative. So put this video in here. You've seen it before, but others may have not. And since this is supposed to be sitting out there as a repository of information, not a suppository of information, my apologies, I will go ahead and play this again. And I apologize, you can't enlarge it, but I think we can see it from here. And unfortunately, the audio is not playing in this room. So, well, it's out there. Again, you all have seen it, and this is largely for you guys today. I would encourage the public to take a look at it too. So there are many benefits, external benefits of having diverse and attainable housing options throughout the city. One, again, less automobile dependency by being able to live a walkable or bikeable distance from most of one's daily needs, which contributes to cleaner air and better quality of life for residents. Less impervious surfaces needed to store those cars that people are sometimes required to use to get into the city to get to work because they're forced to live farther out. A higher population density makes public transit more viable, which can lead to more route options and more efficient routes. Lower greenhouse gas emissions through transportation alternatives and reduced driving distances. Improved community health through active transportation options. Better social connections through neighbors and being able to stay in your neighborhood as you transition to different housing needs throughout your life. And again, increased financial independence from not owning a car. So every year, AAA comes out with the estimated cost of car ownership annually. And for the first time last year, it crossed the $10,000 mark. So when you factor in, it's all right there, exactly. I'm not denying that. Yeah, well, they factor in fuel, maintenance, repairs, tires. But again, this is our time to have our discussion, so I appreciate the lack of interruptions. Thank you. So anyhow, this factors in fuel, maintenance, repairs, tires, insurance, registration, taxes, finance charges, and depreciation based on a 5-year ownership period and 15,000 miles annually. So 75,000 mile period. A couple other things, when you have some housing options that allows people to use, private property owners to use the equity that they may have built in their house to possibly build an ADU, a duplex, section off a piece, which in turns allows for passive income, especially in later years in life when a lot of people are living off a more fixed income. So why are we looking at all of these type of options? Well, the reality is we don't have a lot of vacant land in the city. We're largely built out. And this is definitely a regional issue, and I can assure you, well, it's a local, regional, state, and national issue, but meeting with the local planners throughout the area, they're all working on housing in different capacities, but they have different development patterns, and therefore they're using different tools. So what Garfield may be able to do, we simply don't have the available land to do, such as what you see up on Lafreniere. So we have to think of different options because we're a completely different setting.
Can
So
I interrupt you real quick,
Mhm.
Mr. Winter? So I actually just Googled the 2022 cost of car ownership from AAA, and 10,000, where's the number? $10,728 is for a car ownership period, not a new car. New car is $44,697. Thanks.
So here, just to kind of illustrate, and this question came up with the Planning Commission before, is where do we have our vacant land? So just a tutorial, when you have these maps, you can use the plus and minus to zoom in and zoom out. You can click and pan around, or you can click this and make it full screen, and then you can just use the wheel on your mouse to zoom it in and out. But as you can see, there's very, very little vacant land. Some of it is really unbuildable. So if you look here, this parcel is just all wetlands, so that can never be built. We have a few smatterings here and there. Others are areas of really tight topography, such as this section along the new Boardman Lake Trail, or some real weird pieces like we have here where the railroad right-of-way exists. So clearly that'll never be, in our lifetime, likely used for housing. So again, the idea that greenfield development is a very vibrant option for us is not really true. So some other considerations, we hear about historic districts. So the properties located in historic districts, which we have 3 of, have an additional layer of regulations to help maintain that historic character. So any exterior project that requires a building permit has to get approval by the Historic District Commission to make sure it is consistent with the character of that district. And an existing structure in a historic district cannot be torn down unless they can prove to the Historic District Commission that the property has no viable use as is, and it can only be torn down. And in the last 22 years, that hasn't happened once. So the idea that someone's going to buy up the historic homes and tear them down is not a reality. So I want to talk about short-term rentals. So nothing that is included in your goals would allow for more vacation rentals in the residential districts. Vacation home rentals simply aren't allowed now. None of this would create or allow more of that. The tourist home rentals, where someone rents a room out in a single-family home, that is currently allowed. There's no changes being proposed to that to allow more tourist homes and duplexes and things like that. So again, no changes to the short-term rental regulations. And vacation home rentals are prohibited in the neighborhoods. Also heard concerns about outside investors. If you allow some of these housing options and people are going to gobble up the properties, tear them down, build all this higher density. And if that was a reality, we would probably be seeing that now because the R2 district allows up to 2 family units per lot, and it's mostly developed as a single family unit. So we went through the last 10 years of records looking to see how many duplexes we've actually permitted, and in 10 years there's only been 15. And 7 of those have been in that district. The others have been in commercial districts such as the D development districts, the multifamily districts, or part of the Morgan Farms planned unit development. So we're not seeing that now. I doubt that's likely going to happen. So next we want to talk about the history of zoning. So again, zoning is relatively young in this country. It started at the beginning of the early 1900s, and it was a result of the rapid urbanization and industrial revolution that was occurring, and some of the negative effects that were being encountered in the larger cities, such as New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. So they came up with zoning that kind of started separating uses to provide better health, safety, and welfare for individuals. In Traverse City, we didn't adopt our first zoning ordinance until 1943. That's only 80 years ago. So many of our buildings predate zoning, as well as many of our most valued residents predate zoning here. So again, it's not the way it's always been to have strict regulations. It doesn't mean that zoning should go away. It definitely has its benefit. But as evident by historic neighborhoods, without really strict regulations, you can still have very beautiful neighborhoods that protect the properties and provide a high quality of life. So I commend you for your pursuit of this. One thing that was interesting is when the city first started regulating land uses, if you look at the 1943 zoning map, every single place that is colored allowed 2 or more residential units per parcel or per lot. Back then, things were way more rural than they are now. We actually had, what's it called, forest and agriculture districts still within the city. Of course, we don't have that anymore today. And so this just kind of demonstrates that exclusive single-family zoning hasn't been the character or the history of our city. It was actually the exception. It was only the base of the peninsula and the western part of the city that limited to just single-family. And it's also important to note that throughout history, communities have used zoning as a tool to segregate and keep people out, whether based on income or ethnicity or race, out of communities. It wasn't the only way that people did that. They also did it with redlining and deed restrictions, but it has been part of the history of the zoning regulations throughout the country. So one thing I want to point out is single-family zoning. Nothing that you're proposing would ban or prohibit single-family zoning. It's all about creating more options, not eliminating them. So if someone wanted a large house for their family, even after their family moves out, to have their kids and grandkids come and stay with them, they can still do that. If someone wants a large yard to have children play in and things like that, they can still do that. What we're just saying is it'd be nice to have options so people in different situations can still experience those neighborhoods. Because family units look different. You know, you may have a family that's a single parent and a child. Shouldn't they not be able to experience the same high quality of life that a double income earning family of 5 has? So those are some of the things to think about. So now we'll start going into the zoning districts real quick. In 2021, the Planning Commission did a lot of work on its multiple family districts. We used to have 3 sub-districts, R9, R15, and R29. Each one of those numbers indicated the allowable dwelling units per acre or density in each of them. The amendment that occurred in 2021 combined all 3 of those into one R3 district, eliminated the density caps, set new limits to maximum impervious surfaces and tree canopy, introduced design standards where we really didn't have any, modified the height limits when it's adjacent to single family to minimize the impact, and created a setback from Kids Creek where there previously was none. And again, none of those changes allowed for more vacation home rentals. So with those done, it's time to look at the R3 or the R1 and the R2. So the residential zoning districts that we're looking at are the R1A, B, and the R2. Collectively, they make up about 35% of the zoned land in the city. When I say zoned land, I mean exclusive of things like right-of-ways and water bodies and things like that. or in other words, just over 1,500 of the city's 4,500 acres. So when we look at the R1AB, the primary use is single family. At 1,305 acres, this accounts for almost 83% of our residential land. So out of all the land, we're saying, hey, the best use here is to house people. We've limited 83% of it to one housing type exclusively. The R2, which does allow for two families as well as single families, is the smallest of the residential districts at 104 acres, and it represents only 6.6% of the residential land. And then R3, which, as we mentioned, we already addressed, allows the single family, two family, as well as multiple family, and makes up about 10.5% of the residentially zoned land. So before we get into the proposed zoning ordinance amendments based on your housing goals, it's just important to talk about the limitations, because it may sound like there's a lot of things being discussed, but every one of them comes with their own layers of limitations. Just kind of go through an example. If someone wanted to, say, add a duplex if it was allowed, or build housing on a piece of property, first and foremost, the established zoning standards have to allow that particular housing type on that property. And if it did, then the existing site conditions of the property must support it, whether it's the siting of an existing house or the environmental conditions. Then what's key is you have to have a property owner who's willing to do it or wanting to do it. Then that property owner has to have the time and means to do it. And then if they did, they also have to find the ability to hire a contractor, which if anybody's had to do any work lately has been quite a challenge. So although it sounds like a lot collectively, when you get down to it at the end of the day, the true realized potential is actually much more minimal than it may seem just on paper. So getting into the proposed zoning ordinance amendments. The first is to create some new definitions for duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. Because right now in the R2 district, we say two-family homes, or two families, that can either be in one single building or two separate units. So we're going to introduce duplex as meaning two units in one building, and we'll kind of explain that as we go through this. Triplex is going to be 3 units in one building, and quadplex, 4 units in one building. The next is eliminating the annual cap for accessory dwelling units. It started off as 10 at first, then it went to 15. That number, honestly, is completely arbitrary. We already acknowledge that by permitting accessory dwelling units, that they're a appropriate type of housing in the residential district. So why have an arbitrary limit if at the same time we're identifying the need for more housing? If we had a year, as it mentions, where 17 people went through all those limiting variables and wanted to build 17 accessory dwelling units, I think that's something that we would want to support. I don't know how that would serve the city's best interest by telling 2 of them that they
We've
can't.
never reached the 15, have we?
We
In a year?
haven't yet, no. But we've gotten close.
Oh,
But
we did.
again, if we had 17, would we want to tell 2 of them no?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, right, but the question being, or presenting that the demand isn't there anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's
so-
not like by lifting the cap, all of a sudden 700 ADUs are going to be
Right.
built.
Right.
Yeah. The next is removing the owner occupancy requirement. You know, to be honest, we don't require that a duplex has an owner living in it. We don't require that some of these non-conforming sixplexes have an owner living in it. And if you really boil it down, that's introducing discrimination into our housing policy. We're saying that as a renter, based on stereotypes, you have to be watched by an owner to live. And that's not true. I went from owning a unit with my wife for 6 years to renting. And we did that so we could be mobile because we were getting ready to apply for different jobs, and that's when we moved up here. So what this is saying is that if I wanted to live in an accessory dwelling unit with her, I have to be overseen by an owner on the property. That just doesn't seem right, because after all, if I have a property that I own and I'm renting it out long-term, and I have the means, again, to provide another ADU, and we're trying to provide more housing, why, again, would we want to stop that? So. The next one is allowing ADUs with duplexes. Keep in mind with the new introduced definition, a duplex would be 2 units in the same building. So as we saw in some of those examples, it takes the same built form, largely as a single-family house, and we allow ADUs with single-family houses. So this would have a very similar development pattern in the neighborhood, as a single family with an ADU. Plus, likely when you have duplexes and ADUs, they're smaller units. You could have an ADU and a duplex where you have one person living in each unit for a net of 3, or on the lot next door, a single family property with 2 parents and 4 kids. So this could, operate at a lower density. It's not a given that it's going to be more congestion. The next one then is allowing duplexes by right in the R1A and R1B zoning districts. So as we mentioned earlier, these were allowed throughout the city for most of its history. We have them distributed quite prevalently, and we'll be looking at a map shortly for that. And again, since we're saying duplexes, they would take on that same built form as a single family house. It couldn't be 2 separate units. And so then with allowing the uptick in dwelling units allowed by right in the R1A and B, it is proposed that the R2 allow up to 4 dwelling units per acre. Now, I want to point out a major limiting factor for that, and not per acre, per lot, is that any structure, whether it's new or converted, that has 3 or more units has to have a fire suppression sprinkler system put into it. So this idea that these very large old homes will suddenly be subdivided is a major cost prohibitive factor. And when you can't use it for short-term rentals, which would create the revenue to justify that cost, again, it is very unlikely. You're really going to generally see this in R2 properties where new construction is occurring. But we would add language that said that you can't have more than 2 structures for housing in that district. Because right now, as I mentioned, the R2 allows 2 families, but they can be separate. So what we're saying is you're going to keep that built form of only 2 structures per lot. That could either be a triplex with an ADU, 2 duplexes, or just 1 quadplex. And of course, in every zoning district in the city, you can build single-family homes, so that would still be an option available. All right. The next one is reducing the minimum lot area in the R1AB zoning districts. So A and B sub-districts have 2 separate dimensions. So R1A has a minimum of 9,000 square feet, and it's proposed to reduce that down to 7,000 square feet. So instead of needing 18,000 minimum to split, you would only need 14,000. The R1B requires 5,000 square foot minimum, and it's proposed that that be reduced down to 4,000 square feet. Therefore, you would only need 8,000 square feet to split a lot instead of 10,000 square feet. But it's very important to point out that just because a lot has the minimum square footage to be split, most of the lots in the city would be unable to be split, either because they lack the sufficient width or the existing development pattern has a house located in such a way that you wouldn't be able to get the split and meet the standard. So here we have some maps to kind of show you that. R1A is primarily the base of the peninsula, the western part of the city, as well as the southern. And so these are the areas where you did have your historically exclusive single-family zoning starting back in 1943. So when you move the slider to the left, you'll see all of the lots that are splittable based on square footage alone, not the other variables that come into play that we have to look at. When you move the slider to the right, that's what the map would look like under the proposed conditions, with the reduction from 9,000 to 7,000. But Laura, who made all these maps and did a great job, built it so when you pull it in to a certain extent or zoom, you'll be able to see the aerial below it. So you can see, even though all these properties meet that minimum, it's somewhat misleading because, again, the fact that they've been developed and we're a developed city prevents most of that from happening. But there may be opportunities out there, and that's why, again, I commend you for including all of these together. And similarly, you can see in the R1B, when you go from 5,000 to 4,000, the change, but if you take the time to zoom in and look at them, again, almost every property is developed in such a way that it makes it very difficult to split any of these. And since you have this, let you guys take the time to go through it on your own. So the next one, to somewhat help complement the proposed reduction in minimum lot width, it's also proposed to reduce the minimum lot area, proposed to reduce the minimum lot width. So currently, where it's 9,000 square feet in the R1B with a 90-foot minimum width, we're proposing 7,000 square feet with 70 feet minimum width. And then for the R1B, we're only proposing to reduce the minimum lot width for the section east of US 30, north and east of US 31, M72, east of Milliken, and south of Eastern Ave. Because right now, all the rest of R1B has a 35-foot minimum width, except that section has a 45-foot minimum width. So that's where we're proposing to reduce that down to 35 feet as well. Now, I do want to point out that most of the city was platted with 25-foot lots, and it was very common for people to buy two of them to have 50 feet. But as you'll see in the non-conforming maps later, many of our lots, even our historic neighborhoods, only have 25-foot wide widths. So this is not too different than what exists out there on the ground today. So again, I already talked about R1A lot width, reducing that from 90 to 70. R1B, sorry, here's the map. So there you have your lot width that's splittable at 90, and then when you come through at 70. So again, very few additional lots, and if you go in and look, some of them just simply can't be done. Like this one right here, you really have no way to split it because that house covers too much of the width of the lot to make it splittable. And then, as mentioned, the R1B is only looking at this portion of the R1B because everything else is already 35. So this is where we're proposing to reduce it down to 35 from its current 45. And so by sliding, you can see, but again, other limiting factors apply. So next is just to marginally increase the impervious surface limits. It's recommended that each of them be increased by 5% because if you allow a slightly smaller lot, by increasing the impervious surface limits just a little bit, it allows a similarly sized house to be sited than as to what is permitted today as well. So the next one is to allow 2 homes on a lot that is twice the minimum area without it being split. Some property owners aren't interested in the split. And we've heard a couple different instances where people could not split it, but had the land area to do it. There was a couple that came in, they had their parents living in a split level at the base of the peninsula. It had plenty of width, but couldn't make the street frontage work. And all they wanted to do was build a second home that was a ranch style, so they no longer had stairs for their aging parents, and then they were gonna move into the split level to kind of care for them and take care of them as they aged. We also heard at the last study session of the individual who lives near the Civic Center who has a similar situation, but it's her son who she hopes to provide a semi-independent life for, who needs additional care, and she would like to build a second home on her lot that is twice the minimum width, but has other variables preventing it from being split. So next is just reduce the minimum land area for cluster housing development. Right now, the minimum is set at 5 acres. We do not have any 5-acre residential lots in the city, so this could never be used under the current standard unless someone was able to acquire quite a few adjacent lots. So we are proposing that it be reduced down to 1 acre, and instead of the city commission SLUP process or special land use permit process, it fall under the category of administrative special land use process. Because one thing I didn't mention, when we went back up and talked about allowing duplexes in the R1, A and B by right, we currently do allow the conversion of a single-family home to a duplex, but it requires a city commission SLUP, which is very time-consuming, onerous process. And for the average person that doesn't work in government or experience a lot of it, it can be very overwhelming and intimidating to have to come to public hearings and all this and that. If it's something that we want to allow, then we should make it easier for that to happen. So for similar reasons, that is why we're proposing to change the cluster housing option to an administrative SLUP as opposed to a city commission slip, which is done by the department. A public hearing is still held, but you're not televised on cameras. You're not going to multiple meetings with microphones and things like that. And then we have renaming the R1A B and the R2 zoning districts to better reflect what would be allowed if the changes that have been proposed to support your goals went into effect. So it's proposed to change the R1AB from single-family dwelling district to low-density dwelling district, and R2 from the two-family dwelling district to the mixed-density residential district. So again, as mentioned, throughout much of the city's history until a couple of decades ago, much of what is being proposed was allowed, and it's resulted in the built-out development pattern that we have today. So as a result of the changes in the regulations, we have all these non-conforming uses and lots. So every lot that is highlighted here could not exist today under its current standards. So we have created a key here to indicate what type of nonconformity it is. We may work with these colors to make them a little more distinguishable from one another. But again, Laura went through and put in the transparency, but also built in some other tools. So you can click on it, and you'll see the house, and you'll see that it is a nonconformity because it allows 3 families. So you can see what these look like in reality out there. Another thing I forgot to mention, with those width and lot maps, if you click on those two, it'll tell you what the width and lot area are, so you can see some of those values. So if you look at some of these non-conforming lots, like this one right here, it's non-conforming because it's only 24 feet wide. You know, so we're not even proposing anything near that low, but all throughout here, you can see all these 24 or 25-foot lots, because that's what the historical development pattern has been in our neighborhoods. So kind of wrapping things up, we did receive a number of letters of support from different industry sectors and institutions. Those have all been added here through various buttons, so you can read them. As you heard in our last study session where we had guest speakers, this is impacting a lot of our institutions. So we received letters of support for this from NMC, Traverse Connect, TCAPS, Housing North, Munson Healthcare, and Aspire North. So some of our next steps, we want to make you aware of this, and we put this on the map, or on the story map, so the public's aware of it as well. We have some master plan listening sessions coming up on the 19th and 20th, as well as some virtual options on the 22nd, which is a Saturday. There's 2 of them. We put the locations and the dates and time of each of those. If someone's confused on where any of those are located and can't find it because we don't have the addresses, please call Laura in our office and she'll help you out there. And if you can't make it to yours and you don't want to do the virtual, feel free to come to another one. That's not a problem at all. So the timeline for addressing your goals, again, we're having a study session today. This is a chance for you to discuss amongst yourself the proposals as they reflect your goals. The next regular meeting would be the 2nd. So that is where you could formally introduce this and make a motion to set a public hearing. May 16th is the next scheduled study session. We will be having a community open house at the Opera House where we'll have different tables set up with each of these scenarios. Since it is your regular scheduled study session, I hope that you can come and make it. We may start it a little earlier because 7 o'clock can get late for some people with young children and stuff like that. But we want to have the opportunity for dialogue, because these meetings are your meetings that the public gets to observe, but it doesn't give the back and forth that we know many people would like the opportunity for. So we've set that up for the 16th. So on June 6th, you could hold your public hearing. That would allow you to make a motion to recommend sending it to the City Commission. It would be introduced to the City Commission at their regular meeting on June 19th. I believe it is by charter that we have to wait 14 days after something's introduced at the City Commission before action can be taken. So that next regular meeting would be July 3rd. Historically, that one gets canceled because of everyone's activities. So July 10th, depending if, because July 3rd was canceled, there was enough regular items that needed action, the City Commission could have a special meeting, in which case this could be put on that agenda for possible action. And if not, then July 17th would be the next regular planning or City Commission meeting where they could take action on that. And again, that's the fastest anything could happen based on requirements in the charter and state law. So again, the neighborhood listening sessions, Laura was able to embed the master plan website into the story map. So all these links work, and you can go to the different areas, and you can pop out as a new tab as well. And we put additional resources on here. So we've put together these resources and shared them with you. They've been referenced in the draft chapter on housing for the master plan, but they're all speaking to the same solutions that you're trying to go after here and what you're proposing, but they're coming from all kinds of different perspectives. We're hearing the same call to action from the AARP, from the National Association of Realtors, from the American Planning Association, the Michigan Association of Planning, the Michigan State Housing Development Authority, the National Association of Home Builders, even National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and again, the APA. So that is the story map. It's a lot of information, a lot of content that was intentional because, again, this is meant to be a tool and to provide that narrative for you. I commend Laura and thank her for all the hard work that she put into creating this, and applaud the Planning Commission. This is a significant moment when it comes to housing. Again, none of these by themselves are going to make a change. You've set some lofty goals. Collectively, I think you have the opportunity here to move the needle on housing and make it a community for everyone, that people can have multiple points of entry and opportunities to stay here. So thank you.
Wow.
Well, thank you. I mean, this is a fantastic document. Commend both of you.
And Jerry,
Yeah,
And
the
Jerry.
GIS guy.
Yeah, this is an incredible document. And I mean, I have zero objections to it, but I would like to hear what the commissioners have to say. Any comments to support, any objections to where this is going?
So
Commissioner
I always
Colbert.
think the way to answer fears that we hear is to educate, and this document does that remarkably. This is like the first year of planning school here. And I really have to thank Laura and Sean and Jerry for this document. And I've had worries and apprehensions going in the past, but I think a lot of this has been answered for me. And I do think that these maps showing what already exists is a huge, huge boon for all of us as we make the case for this. And I also feel like resistance will not be what we had one time expected. I do think the things that have come up in the few letters we've gotten so far always goes back to cars, of course. And we haven't addressed that in this issue, in this document, and we might want to talk about that a little bit. There were some things said about, wait, you're changing impervious surface. And I like the way Sean answered that just a few moments ago. Yeah, I think it's brilliant. I think it's terrific.
Commissioner Desuri?
I echo, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time echoing the same things that we're all going to end up saying. But the one thing that did stick out the most to me is renaming the two different R1A and R1B. It makes sense to me. They seem like really dated names anyway, and considering single-family homes are still allowed in the two-family, it just makes sense to name it mixed use instead of what it has always been named, or what it has been named for a while. So I really, really support the renaming. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Commissioner Shaw?
Yeah, sorry, I'm going to stick out a little bit. I found the whole thing kind of overwhelming. 33 pages of that dense text in the housing draft ordinance, plus this story map, kind of made me think of Shakespeare, thou dost protest too much, methinks. Feeling a little snowed. I cling to the Planning Commission core principles of our neighborhoods need to preserved and protected as they evolve. And natural and historic resources are limited and needed to be protected. And also the Traverse City Commission strategic priorities, the high-level themes, which are focusing on long-term impacts and considering goals and actions through the lens of the climate crisis. So looking at that, I'd like to start with the current housing units that we have now, the units that were permitted over the last 2 years, and Housing North's calculation of what the region will need over the next 2 years. So we have, according to the census, 8,412 housing units in 2020. Then in 2021, 447 were permitted, and in 2022, 413 more were permitted. This is just in Traverse City. So that's a total of 9,272, and that doesn't include this year. So growth, according to the census, over in Traverse City over the last 10 years has been at 14.3%. So you take those last 2 years of new permits and just 447, 413. Let's just say it's 400 a year. Multiply that by this growth, 10 years at 14.3%, and you get 1,325 new dwellings over the next 10 years. Then, I'm sorry, I'm not saying this right. The growth in Traverse City over the last 10 years at 14.3%. Okay, so let's multiply how much we need more over the next 10 years. You need 1,325 more units, according to the growth over the last 10 years. You take that 400 number that is averaged over the last 2 years, that will lead to 4,000 new units over the next 10 years. That's 3 times more than the 14.3% growth rate that we've seen over the last 10 years. Are you following me? Okay, growth rate has been 14.3% over the last 10 years. How many more houses are we going to need over the next 10 years? 1,325. But according to the permitting that's been done over the last 2 years, an average of 400, that will lead to 4,000 more dwelling units in Traverse City. So why, my question is Housing North asking for 5,715 new units over just the next 2 years? Where's that number coming from?
We're talking about housing variety.
Well, yeah, we're not talking about housing, yeah.
All right. It's just a question.
I think it would probably be one best answered by Housing North then, if you're asking where they're getting their number.
Our
Okay.
goals aren't so much about, the new units, multifamily units. It's about the missing middle. It's about creating opportunities for housing variety. This
Right,
entire
but you're still
document.
adding more units, which brings prices down. I mean, so it leads to less expensive housing. We're talking about adding a bunch of housing here to provide more housing for lower income, missing middle, for everybody, older, younger. I'm just wondering about these numbers. How many new houses? Housing North says we need 5,750 new units over the next 2 years.
That's in the region, though, right? I mean, that's
Sure.
Traverse City as a region. That's not just.
I don't know. That's
us.
that's what I'm seeing.
I mean,
in
that
these
can't be
documents.
just us. That would be building the airport into housing, essentially. I mean, that's.
It's also based on a number that we have grown by.
Yeah.
So that includes all of the exclusionary nature of growth
Right.
of the region.
Yeah.
So I think that impacts the number as well.
And I think part of that comes from, and this is a concern that I've heard a lot of, housing is a regional issue, and of course it's a regional issue. But as the Planning Commission, and even as the City Commission, what we can act on is the housing in Traverse City, and there are going to be obvious limitations to that. And so what we can do is this: we can expand the options that are available to people coming in and buying houses, and building houses. And so addressing that shortage is part of what we're doing here, but it's also something that where, so this is an instance of us taking a step into the direction that everyone needs to be taking a step into, and then I think everyone is taking a step in, and I'm sure Sean can attest to this more because he meets with the regional planners more. This isn't, this is everyone. Everyone is working on housing right now. It's the number one issue in the region at the moment. And so us taking this step is us doing our part as part of that regional process to address those missing units that Housing North says we have. And also, I think the 14.3% over the last 10 years is that's astronomical growth for a municipality, and it's probably not something that we're going to sustain at that rate, especially because the exclusionary nature of housing, as Commissioner Duterte said, we're not going to be able to permit units at that rate forever. Eventually, those numbers are going to have to start to dwindle. So,
And just as a
Also-
point of clarification, that 14.3% is not population, right? We know that, it's dwelling units. Okay, just, yeah,
What I like about this is these are, for me, guaranteed year-round housing options. A lot of those numbers that you see there, Heather, the 467 permitted things, are the things that are in the C3, C4 that will turn into short-term rentals. And so you can't really count that as, for me, I don't count that as a living dwelling. I count that as a business.
I agree.
And
But it's
so
a big
this is,
number.
yeah, but it is a big number, but most of them are short-term rentals. So what I like about this is this guarantees, because of the restrictions that we put in place over the past couple of years to protect the neighborhoods, would be long-term housing. So, and it's not going to be that much. The upside-down pyramid for me is very persuasive. It takes a lot to actually have this happen, but to make it possible for those who want to, for me, is big. And I do think it's muddied a little bit, the discussion. This is providing for varieties, and I do understand your point about how much growth can the region take, blah, 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 but for me, that's a different topic.
Okay, but what I see is how much and how fast. When I see these numbers, how much and how fast. And that pyramid that we saw in the story map, that's great, but where'd that information come from? That's the first question I ask. Who came up with that map? Who's telling, where is the source of that information about, it takes this long to do this, and it's this hard to do that, and it's
that's
this,
just fact. You can't build something if zoning doesn't allow it. If an owner doesn't want to do it, Heather, then they're not going to do it. That's not.
Yeah, I like
That's
It was
just
sources.
fact.
It was a reasoning map, yeah.
Okay, well, here's another question. Here's this core principle: our neighborhoods need to be preserved and protected as they evolve. Which neighborhoods are evolving right now? What does that even mean? Where are we seeing the greatest growth, as in like tear downs for multifamily? Or would you say that the redesign of the 8th Street corridor is forcing the Boardman neighborhood to evolve? And how do we preserve and protect its character while also acknowledging the need to add more housing along that corridor? And I'd be curious to know what is considered a good mix in a city like ours between single detached, single detached, and multifamily. Right now, we've got 62% single detached, 5% single attached, and 33% multi. What's a good ratio there?
That was a lot of questions.
Well, because I get interrupted, so I got to get it all in there, and I had it all in one section. So we're looking at neighborhoods evolving. That's what it says. That's our
I would
core
argue-
principle. Where are we evolving?
I would argue that the evolution of the family unit, the household unit, from larger numbers to smaller numbers, is part of how our neighborhoods evolve. On my block in Slabtown, it might be more houses than not are occupied by one person. These are not small houses. They're and obviously families could fit in any of the houses, but I wonder how many people living alone in a large house might welcome a unit in their house, and why would they not have the right as a property owner to create that?
No, I agree. I'm just throwing stuff out here to think about. My neighborhood's gone completely the opposite way. When I moved in, everybody was alone or two people, Orchard Heights. Now it's all families. So yes, it has evolved. But, we're talking about like the Boardman neighborhood, it's being pressured by that 8th Street corridor, and how do we protect it? Okay,
Wait a
let's
minute.
move on. Go ahead.
That neighborhood is protected with the historic district designation, isn't that right?
Yeah, we have Boardman Historic
Yeah.
Neighborhood District.
Okay.
Yep. And I'm just curious what type of pressure, since we don't allow any of this now, what type of pressure are you identifying on that neighborhood?
Noise, increased traffic.
Well, none of the housing variety has anything to do with the commercial corridor, though, I guess is the point.
Okay, point taken. Core principle also, number 4, natural and historic resources are limited and need to be protected. So when you're permitting 2 principal dwellings on lots that are twice the minimum lot size, and you're reducing the minimum lot width and area, and, plus increasing impervious in R1 and AB, all this splitting of lots and adding new construction is going to reduce the leafy appeal of our neighborhoods.
That's not a guarantee. That is not a guarantee.
Yeah, it
No, especially if
Thank
they're
you,
in the
Anna.
same exact home, which we talked about. If you're building on the same exact footprint of that old home, you could split that home up 2 ways into a duplex and have that same home not touch any of the leafy green outside. So to unilaterally say that it will impact the greenage is just irresponsible.
Especially in like central neighborhood and Boardman neighborhood, a lot of those trees sit in the right of way or sit on the edges of lots in places where you wouldn't build a home anyway. Like most of those trees aren't going to be in the way of a place where you would build a house anyway. In central neighborhood, off the top of my head, I can think of probably 2 trees that might be impacted by this. And it would be, there's one tree on the lot that the woman who came and spoke with us before and mentioned that she wanted to split her lot. That's one tree. And there's like maybe another one on a lot that's of a unique width that's another corner lot. So I think that's it's a little out there to say that, we're just going to start taking down trees willy-nilly by allowing like an ADU to go up where a garage currently sits, or to allow an ADU to go up where a shed currently sits. Even thinking of my backyard, a conversation that I actually just had with my dad as we were talking about this earlier today, he was saying, we've got a spot right where our old, basically falling apart shed currently sits that would be great for an ADU, but there's a tree there and there's a fence with our, neighbors there. But that tree's old. It's probably a 90-year-old tree at this point, and eventually it'll die. And we're talking, and he's saying, well, when that tree has to come out, that'd be a good spot to put up a little ADU. We can carve a little parking spot out of the backyard, and that'd be a great spot. But no one's going to go out of their way and say, well, I want to build an ADU or I want to build a duplex, so I'm going to chop all the trees out of my backyard. That's just, I don't think anyone's going to have that thought process.
Well, I wouldn't bet on it. I think this also reflects these Traverse City, the TC Commission strategic priorities of focusing on long-term impacts and considering goals and actions through the lens of the climate crisis. I'm not talking about a garage being converted into an ADU. I'm talking about splitting lots and building more homes, and you're going to take trees down, and I and a lot of other people are going to need some convincing that that reducing lot sizes will lead to positive impacts to both people and the climate.
This is a city, I would argue that, our downtown is beloved. And there's 0 impervious surface required on those lots. It's where human activity is at its height, and people are sharing resources, and it's about the draw from miles and miles around to be in Traverse City. This is the walkable area. It's not, if downtown was a park, it wouldn't be downtown. And if we're talking about splitting lots, you know, we're not talking about cutting the lots in half, the minimum size. We're talking about, you know, from 9 to 7, you know, this is a percentage to allow for smaller lots. And in R1A, the impervious surface would increase from 30% to 35, and then from 45 to 50. So it's a 5% increase, just basically because you're taking, like you said, Mr. Winter, that we have a smaller lot. It doesn't mean you have to have a smaller house. You can have, you know, a marginally similar sized house as was allowed before, but on a smaller lot. And this is a city. That's a small price to pay to allow people to live and enjoy and share in the community that is Traverse City.
And these things can all be balanced too, you know, and they need to be looked at in a balanced fashion. I was in Savannah this weekend, very old neighborhood, developed their residential areas at a much greater density than ours. Like ADUs are almost the norm on every property down there. And people come from all around the world to see the city, and they have way more trees than we do. So you can do it both the same. And yes, it's true, at the end of the day, some trees here and there may have to be cut down to accommodate a house, but I would rather have someone living in that house than living in those trees and the pines, right? Like at the end of the day, we know we need housing for people. So
I'm curious what others are thinking and also what the people in the audience are thinking.
I have a couple more
Oh,
things.
sorry.
All right,
Yeah.
we'll let-
Mount Pleasant took the omnibus approach to pass a bunch of zoning changes, and they said that they achieved much more than they could have by passing ordinances incrementally. However, they also reported a general consensus in the population. I fear that this omnibus approach, coupled with the intensity of the schedule, oh my gosh, will fail to achieve this consensus except amongst older homeowners, like those who are going to perhaps appear at these listening sessions this week. I can't go to these listening sessions. I have work.
You can
And
attend
you
the
know what
virtual
they're
one on
going to
Saturday,
say?
though.
They're going to oppose it.
What about Saturdays? Can you make Saturdays?
because as soon as we schedule them at night, then we get negative feedback that people with kids can't ever come to them. So we, throughout this process of trying to balance the
Well,
opportunities.
I mean, you've heard, we've gotten many letters about this. I'm just trying to create a conversation here. So,
I
okay.
counted one.
Conversation. It feels-
It is a conversation. Isn't that what we're here for? It's a study session.
it feels like a lecture.
Yeah, well, you said that the listening sessions are exclusionary, but there's one on Saturday.
2 on Saturday,
Two on
and there will be an
Saturday.
online one that is not interactive, but you can still go and share your information on the same questions and format. So again, it's not a true statement.
We also have an evening open house coming up in May.
Correct.
Yes.
Right, and we're talking about a couple of months with like robust discussion opportunities from, with the community in the neighborhoods, in the open house, and we've been talking about it for years, and it's been on the goals for years, and so I'm not sure what the
Okay.
aggressive schedule.
And at the end of the day, it's up to the city commission to determine to act on it.
Also correct.
We make a recommendation. You are an apolitical body that makes a recommendation to them.
But here I am throwing out these things that I'm hearing from the community, and I'm feeling that everybody's on the defense.
We're also hearing those things from the community, though. So that's the frustrating part, is like, I also see all of those emails come through, and every single time I'm reading that, it's like, the responses that I'm reading make me feel like I am not entitled to a home in this city. I rent, and I pay so much money in rent, which is exactly what Sean mentioned earlier, which puts me in the cycle of never being able to afford a down payment for a home in this city. And that just feels so awful to, now I'm getting emotional, to try to make these changes and to care so passionately about this, and then to constantly hear that your decisions don't matter because I already own a home here and this is what I care about. And I have an opinion on what young families might want for their homes, but I'm not a young person, so how do I necessarily know that? It's just really incredibly frustrating. So it just feels bad when you say that you're hearing all of this and you're almost saying it singularly, like we're not hearing that.
I'll also chime in. Young people who don't live here right now but maybe want to, for example, people who have left Traverse City to go to school and who could live here with their families, looking at coming back, it's just not. I mean, it's just not possible. There's really no housing available. You're looking at only renting if you're that young, and you look at your options of instead staying in, Lansing or Grand Rapids or Ann Arbor, and there's more job opportunities. The housing is more attainable. There are more options, and it just doesn't make sense to come back to Traverse City. And if we want to maintain the diverse and prosperous community that we have now, where we rely a lot on those young workers, especially in the summer, we need to be looking at how can we make it attainable for them? How can we bring that attainable housing? And the actions that we have before us would do that. It's a lot easier as a young person who's going to be living alone or maybe with one roommate to move into an ADU or an apartment or a duplex, which isn't going to be as expensive as moving into a single-family house. And, we have so many single-family houses here. And that just doesn't make it accessible for a young person to come in, especially a young person coming from a college town, which are these really nice walkable cities with really available transit. You come to Traverse City and all of a sudden you need a car, and that adds to your housing cost again, because now instead of at college you just had a cheap bike that you could ride whenever you needed to go off campus. That doesn't work here, especially if you're not living in town. So it is that cycle of getting stuck renting in places that aren't where you want to be, and not being able to live in the neighborhoods that you grew up in and that you want to live in again. And that is what makes it so difficult for young people, like Anna said.
And I absolutely agree, and we would not have heard that if I hadn't created this little dust-up. So let's talk about cars, since you brought up the car
We
situation.
welcome, I want all of this critical analysis, excuse me, in the room, please. We're speaking and.
This is not an
No.
open
This is-
dialogue. This
there's
is a
time to
meeting of the
speak.
Planning Commission,
There's time to
and you have
speak
the
later.
opportunity to observe them.
So let's talk about cars, since you talked about getting on your old bike and riding off. Well, the people that show up to our meetings and that write us letters have a fear of zoning. We're not zoning for people, we're zoning for cars. There's a fear of we're just adding more cars to the neighborhoods. And whether we like it or not, we live in a northern climate. It's a small city surrounded by a vast rural landscape. And when we talk about housing, we are talking about cars. I suspect that most residents have no problem and are not opposed to a gentle infill of people. But when a gentle infill comes with one car per person or two, the imagination revolts. And I looked up the census data, and Traverse City is completely average. For car ownership, it's 2 per household. So we do have to address this somehow.
But the survey that we just looked at last week, was that not last week? It was the last meeting. The survey that was done of like the populace, one of the first housing surveys we sent out, said that people only owned one car, correct? Yeah,
That is becoming more and more common.
Except
And
the survey went out to...
Traverse City residents.
And how many responded, and what was their age?
1,910, and it's skewed toward an older demographic.
Exactly.
Commissioner Hershey?
What I want to say, so many things I want to say, but time brings lots of change. And I have worked with, in the 14 years I've lived here, many young people. 50% of them or more are gone. It breaks my heart that they were forced to leave because they could not, and there are two people I am so close to now that are leaving, that have done wonderful things in this city. And they're leaving because half the pay for the view of the bay is real, and on that pay, they cannot find adequate housing. I know young people that have moved to Thailand because here they couldn't afford an efficiency. And they have a 4-bedroom house now in Thailand, and they're living a great life. Why do we want to lose our young people? That's what I don't get. And when you look at time marching on, I can tell you, because I have children in their 30s, and I know all these young people, they don't want mega mansions anymore. That's what our generation wanted. They don't want it. They want smaller houses. They want to be able to walk. And the view that we've all talked about, the city commission has talked about, is Traverse City should be a walkable city. And so we need to provide that through housing options, through transportation options. People should be able to walk everywhere, bike everywhere when they can in good weather. We should do a better job with our sidewalks. We don't have to worry about falling on ice all the time. But we should be a walkable city. And so what I get, I think they did a remarkable job on this. But there's just so much fear built up. It's not just about cars. There's fear about so many things that are building up. If you look at these maps, you can see it's limited on what we're going to be able to do. But at least we're trying to do something. We cannot become, and we are really, I believe now, a city of old people. And when you become a city of old people, your schools suffer, you lose attendance, you lose state funding, and your community goes downhill if you don't prepare for the younger generation to take your place. And that's what this is about.
Thank you very much. Well said. If there's nothing else from commissioners, we'll let the public speak at this time, and we
I
can
just
come
want to
back.
ask one more thing,
Certainly.
because I know this is a thing. And I think you were right in putting at the end of every section, this does not allow for more vacation home rentals, but perhaps a sentence as to why. Because maybe the zoning doesn't allow it, or this doesn't allow it, so people understand the why.
Mhm.
I would, that's a suggestion I would make.
And the only other thing we might hear on that is the legislation that was proposed
Yes.
in previous time at the state level that would have, cut out all of the regulations we've put on, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. And I think Wayne Schmidt was one of the people who put that together, and he assured me that it was never going to pass. So
There's no crystal ball.
I
on
don't, yeah,
anything,
we
right?
don't know that for sure, but it certainly is
We have a different.
I think
legislation
not
now.
active anymore.
It died on the floor
Yeah.
last year.
So.
All right, we're going to open now public comment. If anybody would like to speak on this issue, please feel free to approach the microphone. Please state your name, your address, whether you're a Traverse City resident. You'll have 5 minutes.
Which one?
If there are a number of you and you want to line up, have at it.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. My name is Jackie Anderson. I own my home on Comanche Street in Traverse City, and I would like to raise several points for your consideration tonight. First point, what ordinances can be enacted to guarantee affordability, sustainability, and walkability in these upzoned neighborhoods? There have been fairly recent studies of blanket upzoning, like this draft proposal shows, and those studies indicate that without additional regulation, the new development produces market rate housing with the unintended consequence of gentrifying neighborhoods that might currently be somewhat affordable. Could my neighborhood of small 60-year-old homes become a string of $600,000 duplexes with ADUs? Recent experience in other communities like Minneapolis, Portland, New York, even Ann Arbor, says that that outcome is more likely than not. So without parallel regulation, blanket upzoning is simply a financial windfall for developers. Second point, why would you choose to eliminate the chance for neighborhood input by making many of these new opportunities by right? This short circuits the whole process of public input. Here's a scenario. My little house is on a 70-foot wide lot. Say I don't need it anymore, and it's purchased by a developer, and it's bulldozed, and it's subdivided into two 35-foot lots, and 6 new dwellings spring up in that same space, of course without parking, and all without so much as a notice to my neighbors, because it's by right. So unless I'm misinterpreting this, even if you don't particularly care for what the neighbors have to say, shouldn't their voices be heard? Third point, blanket upzoning looks to me a lot like the ghost of urban renewal in the 1960s that wiped out affordable neighborhoods in favor of high-rise or high-density and development. What data and what examples can you provide where upzoning resulted in both more housing and more affordable housing? What metrics will you use to determine if upzoning of Traverse City is successful? Please, don't treat our neighborhoods as guinea pigs. If you truly want to achieve more housing and cheaper housing, why not explore the use of community land trusts or other much more direct routes than blanket upzoning? Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Ms. Anderson.
Sound like point counterpoint. My name is Karen Badja. I live in Empire, but I've owned a business in Traverse City for many years. I also have a daughter, one of 4 of my children, who just recently tried to move back here and purchase property and found it cost prohibitive and difficult, to say the least. And she makes a much better income than I do. Also, you're focusing on young people, but I'm 70 years old, and I can no longer afford a single-family home due to divorce and illness. So if there was an ADU somewhere that I could have, it would be similar to the young people that are trying to come in. Compared to the surrounding communities, this is a very walkable community already, very much so. And it could be improved upon, of course. I understand that when you've lived somewhere for a long time and change happens, it's scary. Change is always messy, always messy. It's never fun to go through the process, but often when you get to the other side, it's not half as bad as what you thought it was going to be. That aside, that was my opinion. I have a direct question for Sean and Laura, if you'd be willing. I haven't seen this proposal before, and I'm not totally familiar with all of your rules here in Traverse City. What would be the difference of my doing a planned unit development here versus the zoning being a given right with the district being changed? Do you have a limit within your PUD as to how many acres or lot size you have to have in order to get the same result?
3 acres.
3 acres, okay, so there aren't many of those in the area. My other question is, when you were showing R1, A, and B that you're wanting to change, and you would allow a duplex in that new, and they could each have an ADU, why would you could you explain to me again, in other words, if I have a single-family home and I want to divide it into a duplex, why would you allow me to also have an ADU then? Can you tell me, you had a reason, and I can't remember
I'm
what
sorry,
it
this
was.
is not a question and answer.
Oh, all right, I'm sorry, I was just trying to
opportunity.
understand better, so.
Have you
thank
read through the story map?
Pardon?
Have you read through the story map? Because it does explain in that section why.
No,
So I would encourage to start with
I came to this
there.
meeting by accident tonight.
Oh, okay.
I thought I was
Helpful.
attending a zoning board of appeals.
I would
And-
say send either of us an email or read that
Okay.
story map, and definitely come on the 16th of May. We're going to have that open house for
Thank you.
for
I didn't
Q&A.
mean to waste your time. I
No,
was
it's
trying
good.
to understand better.
Yep.
Thank you.
Just keeping the
Thank
rules
you.
of the
Thank
meeting.
you.
Yeah, and emailing of questions is probably the best way to go. Yeah.
Such a rush to get up here. Glasses? Tim Warner, 608 West 7th Street. I think this was fantastic. I commend the staff, Laura, Sean, Jerry, for putting it together, because as was said, there's so much put in there, and as far as telling the story, all of this has been said, but to condense it and put it into one place is amazing. And personally, it touched me. The first couple slides in it, when it spoke about reduced carbon footprint, because as many of you know, that's what I've been, trying to evangelize people regarding climate change over the past year, and a reduced carbon footprint. More housing in Traverse City will allow more people to live with a reduced carbon footprint, and it is one very significant way that we can address climate change. And we are part of the world. We could build a wall around Traverse City and keep our population what it is, and pretend not to participate, but I truly believe we should participate and do our part. As far as moving this forward and the meetings that have been had and the upcoming meetings, to me, it's a very reasonable schedule. There will always be folks that say there have been too many meetings. There'll be folks that say this was rushed, but you've been at this for, 18 months, something like that, so it's certainly not rushed. And as I've stated at previous public comment, I encourage you to be bold. Move this forward, keep to your schedule, put the pressure on the City Commission. Put it to them, us, I'm part of the City Commission. Let us take the heat. That's what we're elected to do. You'll be gathering lots of public input, answering questions. There'll be opportunity for answering questions at the City Commission level as well. But I would encourage you to put the burden as much as you can on us to take that heat from the public, those that will be disapproving of it. As far as how quickly this moves, should it happen and be put into place, it's slow. We saw the upside down pyramid, but it's very slow. It's like my neighbors. They've been trying to move for the past decade. They've had about 2 garage sales a year, it seems, and they still haven't moved. Things take time. What will happen faster are the additions of homes for people at Ruth Park, just down the street, Annika 1, Annika 2. That's faster, and I've been advocating for those and more. I'm advocating for Beitner, Lot O, Lot G. That's where I should be taking the heat for that if people are concerned about overpopulation in Traverse City. An ADU here and there in a backyard and a duplex is so incremental. Anna, Laura, Ted, they'll probably get to see the results of it. The rest of us, we won't be so lucky to see the results of this work. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Warner.
I do want to just say a few words. I know that Sean did a great job. All of you did a great job with your presentation.
I'm sorry, could you speak into the microphone?
Oh, hello.
And your name and address, please, for
Oh,
the
yes.
record. Thank you.
My name is Barb Zupan. I live at 205 7th Street. And thank you, Sean, for your presentation and for everybody that put that together. It was a very well-done presentation. But I had a sense listening to this that making these changes would all of a sudden somehow have all this great affordable housing, and people's grandchildren can come back, and everybody's going to have a place to live, and Anna's going to get her house. I mean, I think what we're looking at here is a very small thing that's going to happen. I never understood a number if this happens in the city. What is that? 50 places, 30 places, 60 places? You know, if they can go ahead and proceed with this. But I think there are a lot of unintended consequences to do this. This could happen naturally, I think, if 16 people applied for the ADUs. I mean, can't people go through that process and put their garages up or an additional house or any of that? Does it have to be this blanket across the city that this is what's going to happen and it's going to help bring rents down? There's no guarantee about that. There's some illusion here that things will be affordable. I think we're way past finding affordable in the city anymore. I mean, we've got so much wealth around here and so much wealth coming into the city to think that somehow rents are going to magically go down because I can put a duplex at the end of my property and start, I don't know, selling or buying or something, or having people come in and renting. I don't know, you did a good job. I mean, it felt like it was the answer, but I strongly believe this is not the answer, changing the zoning in our city.
Thank you, Ms. Dupin.
Mary Mills, 424 North Elmwood. So I listened to the presentation, and currently ADUs are allowable in R1 and R2 districts, as long as they meet the conditions. The changes you are making to the current requirements are to eliminate the cap of 15, eliminate the owner occupancy requiring, and allowing an ADU to be built on properties with duplexes. So why the drastic revamping of our zoning ordinances if ADUs are already allowed in these neighborhoods? The cap of 15 ADUs per year has not been met or exceeded as far as I know. Removing owner occupancy will now provide owners of the rental properties 2 rental incomes for each piece of property they own, and 3 if they happen to own a duplex. We are now providing business opportunities for not only residents but investors. There's a home for sale that was redone, added an ADU in the Slabtown neighborhood. It is now on the market for $1.25 million. They charged, the ADU charged $2,500 a month for rent. We have the property on East 12th Street, across from Cone Drive, that used to be, as far as I know, the houses right next to it were on R1B. It is now home to 8 box units. How does that fit within the character of the neighborhood? At the last meeting, residents expressed their frustration towards the development on 8th Street. It did not fit within the character of the neighborhood. And these are not isolated examples. They are occurring throughout the city. Why are there no design standards? Changing the character of our neighborhoods will impact people's lives, the environment, and existing infrastructure of our city. None of these proposals require that the housing be affordable. Rather, you're falling back on an unproven theory that increasing density will hopefully or eventually result in some units being affordable. Where's the data to support this claim? Why not let the organizations that know how to address the need for affordable housing do what they do best? They make affordable housing a reality. And I want to address quickly regarding the master plan. You are not being asked to wait until the master plan is completed. What I've advocated throughout the whole process is that the vision of our city residents and zoning must be in sync, and they're not in sync. Including residents in the discussion, not after the fact or after everything's been decided, all the goals have come together. if we had included our residents in this process, maybe that would have alleviated some of this pushback that you're hearing from residents. That, the fear that is keep being addressed that residents have is not being included. That they are be given something that we know what's best for you. And a key component when you sent out your proposal to get consultants was the statement that community residents would be intricately involved in the process. And as far as I'm concerned, I'll just make this statement regarding housing, they have been excluded from that. And I think it's time that they be included in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mills.
Evening, Tom Snyder, 3735 Incochee Road. And I do agree with a lot of Mary's comments. The integration of residents in a forum that allows debate on these issues rather than what we're doing right here, right now, is trying to make a statement and hoping that it goes somewhere. It's pretty lacking in this environment. All right, just to make that clear. I do want to say that I empathize with Anna's comments and with Debbie as well. I do get it about, if somebody wants to live here, there's some real problems and some hurdles that are very, very difficult to overcome. And that's the way it is right now, right? So a couple things I want to note. First of all, I find it very difficult to understand why the commercial element of all this housing discussion is really separated from this discussion here about residential. I've been here for 3 years, and most of what I see that's been developed on the commercial side within the city limits is really short-term rental stuff. That's a lot of floor space, a lot. I don't know what it is. I can find out eventually, all right? I've got an extensive career in professional problem solving in a major global corporation, so I know how to find stuff. But looking at what we've done here, and you talk about housing stock, there's been a lot of acceptance, buy-off, promotion, tolerance. I don't know use whatever word you want to use, but there's a lot of buildings that are designed for and going to be used as short-term rentals. And that means that they can never be used for permanent housing. And there's defined numbers. That's in the very good database that was created for this, and that was quite impressive as well, I thought. But you can see that, the city's been built out essentially, and now we're talking about trying to do these little itsy-bitsies here and there. But I don't get why there's this concept that you have to be able to walk from your home to the center of Traverse City. I drove 13 miles to work and back for decades, and in the last 7 or 8 years of my career, I was driving 90 miles one way every weekday to go to work and then go back home. There's a lot of property that's outbound within a 10-mile radius of Traverse City. It seems like all we're focusing on, and I get it, you guys are part of the City Planning Commission, all right? But there are solutions outside of the city limit that can certainly play a very tangible role here on trying to provide more housing in this area so that people can live in this area. It's not just Traverse City. Traverse City really is a lot more than what's within the city limits here. And I want to touch on some comments that Heather had about vehicles. I totally agree with the fact that if anybody thinks that we're going to have multiple unit dwellings and people aren't going to have cars because they can walk to town, that's a fantasy. It really is. And this is coming from somebody that literally walks or runs 3,000 miles every year, most of which is from the West End through the city and back. So I can say I've lived that, I know that. But I would challenge anybody sitting here or anybody over here to tell me anyone that goes in grocery shops or goes and purchases goods and brings them back to their home and they walk. And I'm looking forward to some of the things that they're doing with the mobility action plan, but you got to think about the fact that all that stuff really is going to apply 6 months out of the year, because when the weather's not good, people are going to use their car, and they do, and they will. So don't get lost in, thinking that everybody's going to walk and do all this stuff.
Thank you, Tom. Your time has elapsed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder.
Ty Schmidt, 851 Washington Street, actually live in the city. And I appreciate this debate with all of my wonderful neighbors, including folks who come in from the suburbs, from the townships, and tell the city what we should or shouldn't do. I am, in fact, walk to the grocery store at Family Fare now every day to get my groceries for dinner. So I'm one of those people that actually walk to the store. I also like to walk and ride my bicycles. Maybe not 3,000 miles, but I do that. I also have a son in Thailand right now. And one of my biggest things, so Debbie's comment about why are we pushing our young people out? And this debate we're having right here, remember, we've been doing this for 3 years. We've been talking about this since 2020. And for some reason, we took a year and a half off from May of 21 to February, and maybe that was a mistake. But in hindsight, we've been having public conversations about this for 3 years, okay? And I was going to come here and just play my message from the February public comment again, but we gotta take action on this. And if we're looking for consensus, I want you all to stay curious and vote your conscience, but we are not looking for a 9-0 vote. So you're in a hard spot right now, and you're listening to your neighbors, including those who don't live in the city, and taking their input in as well. But you're going to have a hard spot right now, but we need to move this to the city commission in June, okay? And I want you to stay curious, but I am here because this is about values, right? This is about the future of Northern Michigan's capital. This isn't the hub of Northern Michigan or the center. This is the capital we're talking about. And I want you to take this job very seriously. And I empathize because I know this past year you sent 4 things to the city commission that not only they didn't approve, they didn't even make a motion to discuss it, okay? Now is your turn to be brave, to be bold, to listen to our neighbors, okay? And vote on this. And then we can either do it or not, okay? So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt.
Hello, my name is Amy Flugheft. I live at 537 Webster Street. I guess the main thing I want to say tonight is I do have some questions that I'll email per your suggestions. I sent in an email about some concerns. There's a lot of things about this proposal that I do like. Some things I'm concerned about. I guess I'll highlight the fact that it's a small, limited opportunity for things unless it's happening right next door to you. So I do think that then it's 100% affecting you. So I do think that makes sense. Even though it might be limited sphere, the people that it's impacting, it may impact greatly. But my biggest point, I guess, is I want to thank Commissioner Shaw for bringing up good discussion points. And I'm concerned at the vociferous attack. I'll say that I feel like she was given, and I'm worried about that. So I really hope that your listening sessions are indeed that, and that you're coming in with open minds to hear what the residents have to say, because I hear a lot of, this is perfect, this is excellent, we love it, but I'll remind you, you've advertised and people are watching to see that, you've advertised listening sessions. So I encourage you to indeed be open-minded and listening to those comments from your citizens. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Rita Casava. I live at 511 West 10th Street. And I have no doubt the person next to me is going to want to do exactly what you are proposing. And how is that not going to affect me and my grandkids who come to visit for the summer and all the lights? Okay, it's already, Traverse City is illuminating, you know, cars, lights, more animals, more poop on the street. Why don't we work towards taking care of our sidewalks so I can walk downtown? I can't walk downtown unless I have put on my big, huge boots and my what do you call those, cleats or whatever they are. Yeah, there's no way I can walk downtown. I want for everyone, okay? Anna, more than anybody, I want you to have a home here. But, I mean, really, I'm just so curious. So in this, you build these duplexes in someone else's yard. How do you guys do that for taxes? Who pays the taxes on that? Do those people pay the people here and that own the house and stuff like that? I mean, all of it becomes too much. It does the infrastructure already with what we have being built here, okay, is already hard. Two, how is the sewage? How is that going to take? You know, all of that comes to mind. More. And where are all these jobs that these young people are going to get? Really? Munson is the biggest, and they're laying people off. So right now, listen to the people, too. Make it something that we can say yes or no to as well. How many years does one pay for $10,000, $12,000 in taxes? You know? And my sidewalks aren't cleaned. That's wrong. Or if I have an issue with my sewage and I call them, oh, you got to pay somebody to come do it at the alley. Yeah, I did it twice. It had nothing to do with the alley, and I paid for it. I didn't come to anybody else. That hurts, okay? So it's the bigger picture, okay? It'll affect my grandkids if there is a 4-building next door, and I have no doubt that that person would do it, without a doubt, because it'll give him an out, because he hasn't been treated very well in this city, because I work for community mental health, and I work with people, and so that person wants out, because he hasn't been treated very well here. So I can see a 4-duplex building going up. So, I don't know. Think about those things, the sewage, the lights, the cars, the dogs, the animals, all of it. You know, it comes with your decision. So, thanks, Ms. Shaw.
Thank you.
My name's Paul Wilkins. I'm 610 North Madison Street, and I appreciate everyone listening, most everybody listening. Some people aren't. I mean, it's kind of apparent. I'm concerned about the protect and preserve. What stops somebody from building a box structure on these buildings? The Saks construction that's over by Dairy Lodge? I think we're all kind of in agreement. Does it really fit in the character of the neighborhood? Or is it cheap to build? And does it fulfill a need? I think a lot of those went to short-term rentals. And does anyone want that really next to their house? Sean, and I was watching your presentation, by the way. The duplexes, the triplexes that you put up on your screen, they weren't a Saks box construction. They were very attractive houses. What are you doing to put those requirements in so that we're not then saying, oh crap, it's too late now, we can't get it back? I hope you're having enough forethought to put those protections in now, if this is what you're planning on doing. Second point, these listening sessions, I understand that they're not always convenient. You have them on a weekend, people can't make it because of plans. You have them on weekdays, they can't make it. What are you doing to take official word from a neighborhood association The city sponsors those, they recognize neighborhood associations, but yet have you or the city council asked for official positions from each historic neighborhood association? Slabtown, Historic Warehouse District. I understand that not everybody participates in a neighborhood association. However, it is a voice. Why not take that voice? That will certainly give input from people that aren't able to attend those meetings. I don't understand why it's been ignored. Let's see, last issue. I'm hoping that you anticipate. I hear that, and I do share the same concern that a lot of people do, short-term rentals and outside investors. Guys, we are a resort community. Let's face it. Traverse City is a place that people come to vacation. Let's make sure it doesn't happen to be the next Lake Tahoe or Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Do your research. I hear that past experience says that it's not likely to happen for outdoor investors. What are we doing to make sure that it doesn't? What types of deed restrictions, these types of things? I know Charlevoix is actually building a community that must be homesteaded by owners so that people live, work, play, and send their kids to school here. Not people that are going to be out of town that close it up and they live here for 3 weeks out of the year. And we do have those people here too. They can out-purchase you, Anna. All right, that's all I have to say. Paul Wilkins. And oh, by the way, Tom is a city.
He's not. He's 2 parcels out.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkins.
Sorry, breaking this thing here. Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for having this presentation tonight. I wanted to come out and show my support and at least get up and say, please keep the momentum going. This is much needed. The housing for young professionals moving into this area is a real thing. I'm a local business owner, and forgive me, I didn't start out. My name's Mike Goodall, 703 South Union Street. My wife and I moved to Traverse City in '95. We've been Michigan residents all of our lives. We first rented a house on 117 East 16th Street that we recently also purchased, and the reason for that is we couldn't find housing for a new talented employee that was moving to the area. She was commuting from Grayling, and our old house that we used to rent when we first moved here became available for us to purchase. We went ahead and did it. And currently my employee is renting that house from us for, basically just to cover expenses so that we can bring a new professional to the area. I think that using the footprint that we have to bring multiple residents in on one lot is smart. I feel like it advocates for property owners' rights as well, and gives you options to stay here in Traverse City and to convert that property into different uses as you stay in age. Moving your parents into your house is a real challenge that a lot of people that are getting up into our age face. I definitely can appreciate Commissioner Arnold's points is young folks that are needing to find smaller spaces that are more available here in town, or more affordable. It just makes economic sense to be able to take a house and bring more families into it if you have the space to do that. So go for it, keep it going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Goodall. We'll go ahead and, if no one else is wanting to speak, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Thank you all. Commissioners, Commissioner Duterte.
I have a couple responses. One, the Sox units near the Dairy Lodge are in a C district, I believe C3, correct?
I can tell you in a moment.
I'm almost certain they're in a C district because I talked about this one time.
Yeah, C2. C2.
Perfect, thank you. They're in C2. Okay. And then it's in C2.
Yeah, it's always been C2. Same thing with the 8 boxes on 12th Street. That's not zoned residential either. That's zoned commercial.
Perfect.
C2 as well.
Then my second point,
Wait, just covering short-term rentals regarding C2.
yeah, that's why I was bringing that up, is because they're regulated differently in the C district.
We've already taken care of that. With years back, we limit all short-term rentals to a maximum of 25% of the dwelling units on the property. So so they're guaranteed to have 75% of those units will be occupied or at least paid for, rented by long-term residents.
And that is that's the C1, the C2, and the D2 zoning districts. The whole area is zoned C2, yes. And again, this is not a, now's
I
not the
only
time.
brought this up so that we could have this discussion, but again, public comment has closed, so. I addressed it, okay. Moving on. So my second point, because my father is the Director of Public Services and works for the City of Traverse City, I would like to make the statement that sidewalks are plowed on city property, so that includes bridges or any property adjacent to city parks. However, if you own a home or own private property within the city limits, you are responsible for clearing that snow or clearing anything on that sidewalk. It is not the city's responsibility to clean your private property's sidewalk. They sometimes do if it's adjacent and they're in the area, but that is homeowners' responsibilities, private property owners' responsibilities to clean those sidewalks. And then my last point is this is an overwhelming conversation. Everybody has a reaction to change and everybody reacts differently. The only reason I speak to my experience is just so that folks can hear from the horse's mouth an experience. I pay 1/3 of my income to my rent, and I live walking distance from here, and I also walk to get my groceries. I just want people to have that picture in their mind when they're thinking about this situation, because it's incredibly hard to stay here. My rent increased this year, and it's just a real challenge. I'm committed to it because I want to be here. I want to raise a family here, and my entire family lives here, but it's so hard. And sitting in these conversations when people say, Anna, I want you to afford this house. I really do, but can't you just drive 15 minutes out of town? That's just so unreasonable and just disrespectful. And I am telling my story so that exposes me to this kind of reaction, and I'm fine with that. It is also just think about that a little bit. Regardless of whether or not you say, I really want it to happen for you, Anna, but that but is so exclusionary. So I just want to leave it at that. Thank you.
I think
Commissioner
a
Hershey?
comment I want to make is we have been to dozens and dozens of community meetings, community pop-ups, talking to people, listening to what you have to say, answering questions. We have how many coming up in the 19th, the 20th, the 26th, the one in May? We are constantly at this. So to say we are not hearing from the community, we have offered so many opportunities for the community, and we are still offering. One thing I want to say, though, is that April 22nd, I didn't see a link on anything that was here tonight.
We'll put it in the story map.
So if they can find the link, that would be great. But also, we have been offering online if you can't come at certain times. So we are trying to listen. And yes, these listening sessions are for listening, but also asking questions, also making suggestions. We are out there and have been out there. So that's what I want to say.
I wanted to speak to one of the comments, and that was the question of how can you guarantee that these will be affordable? I'm not certain that these won't be market rate, but this is just another opportunity to have a variety of housing types. So I was in conversation with a newly hired leader in our community who felt that she might not be able to live in the place that she is servicing. She came with 2 children and her husband, and has had to rent for the first year and is now having to move into another rental unit. So it's not just service workers, right? This is a leader in our community, one of the major hires that the city has made, who is really struggling because she wants to live in the place that she is working. And so I'm not, this isn't a guarantee of affordability. It is a guarantee of variety and variety of size. And so this is a different discussion than the Annika Places and the Ruth Parks and the things that are happening in the commercial districts. These are in our residential neighborhoods. So I just wanted to answer that. And also I wanted to say, one of the things that I've talked about is a pattern book, speaking to some of these things. How are we going to guarantee what does or doesn't happen? But we have checks and balances in the residential neighborhoods of what can and can't be built. So the fear that a 4-story monolith will be built next to you is unwarranted. So I wanted to speak to that for just a minute. And the other thing, somebody correct me on this, community land trusts are when you have land, right? And we don't really have any land. Isn't that correct? That came up with someone as well. And so I don't think that's a possibility for us. So I heard a lot of interesting comments, but those are the ones that stuck out as something that I thought we could address right away.
That, and I thank you, Ms. Cobert. And you know what? Also, you know, we are listening to you. We do take all of your comments and take them to heart. We may not agree, and we are, you know, looking at a lot of documentation, a lot of data, a lot of you know, trends in the country and in the region, in the state. You know, we are trying to do our best to allow Traverse City to be a viable and vibrant community, and part of that is getting out of the way. That we're our current zoning is exclusionary and limiting to the way that housing would hope to develop within our residential neighborhoods, and the idea that we would promote housing outside of town only and not allow more housing options within town is kind of insulting. That the city provides opportunities, and so people should have the opportunity to access those opportunities. They shouldn't have to commute into town so that their kids can play with other kids. You know, they don't need 10 acres. Not everybody wants to live out on 10 acres, or you know, we want to take advantage of the amenities and the community that a city provides, and allowing something beyond only mandating single-family housing is something necessary for how any city really needs to operate for all the stages of life that like was said. And I also wanted to talk about parking and cars. It's not a good reason. I don't think it's a good reason to say, oh no, there's going to be more cars. What about more people? You know, if there's more people. These are good things. Good things is that there's more happening in town. There's the idea that someone would build a fourplex and not provide any parking. Now that's kind of an idiot move, I would say. You know, like there's no parking allowed on streets, and people have cars. So figure it out. And we have duplexes, we have fourplexes, we have these things already existing in town. There's a little strife here and there with parking, But it's figured out, basically. It's not an impossible task to, you know, if you're going to provide dwelling and you know that people are going to have cars, provide some parking too. It's up to you. So I just don't see it as a reason to say, no, wait, we have to only have single-family homes because otherwise there's going to be more cars. It just doesn't make any sense to me. So.
Forgot one other thing I
Night.
wanted to say. I'm sorry. I was looking at David. That made me remember this. The reason I accepted the appointment to the city commission is that my driving force is to start limiting short-term rentals in the C3 and C4 districts. So that's why I want to get through this, so we can get to that, because yes, that is a travesty, what has happened in our C3 and C4. And so it is on our radar, and so that we hope to get to next.
So I'll just kind of add some more context to things you were hearing from today. Again, parking was intentionally not part of the story map because of the fact that in 2021, this body made a recommendation to the city commission to decouple parking from housing. So that's why we're not addressing it. We don't require it, but David's absolutely right. You know, if you're not going to provide parking, then you're limiting who you can rent to if they have a car, since especially they're not allowed outside or on the city streets. And even with our multifamily, we see that, yes, people are still providing parking at the rate that they find that their market needs, as opposed to what we're arbitrarily prescribing to them. The sewage treatment plant, I'll look up the number. The last I heard, it's maybe not even at 50% capacity. There's this concept out there that our sewage treatment plant doesn't have capacity, and that's simply not true. And if Traverse City never built anything again, capacity would go up, because that treatment plant serves Elmwood, Long Lake, Garfield, Acme Township, and East Bay. It's a regional treatment plant, so just saying like we can't build anything ever again because of sewage capacity would be limiting us. Design standards are tricky when it comes to single-family homes or residential low-density units. Traditionally throughout zoning, the least amount of restrictions and the greatest amount of flexibility has always been afforded to that due to private property rights. People want to be able to add a porch here and stuff like that. And outside of our historic districts, it does get very difficult, because what design are we trying to promote? Is it the ranch across the street from me? Is it my duplex? Is it the Queen Anne down the road, the Victorian? You know, we have a lot of variety out there already. These listening sessions that are coming up, they are for the master plan, all right? So the ones that are on the 19th and 20th, now housing is part of the master plan. Just be aware they're not exclusive to the issue of housing. The open house on May 16th will be. We're not going directly to neighborhood associations for the master plan for these listening sessions, and that was intentional because, again, some residential neighborhoods don't have associations, and their voice matters just as much. And in some neighborhoods, people have expressed they will not go to their association meeting, and their voice matters just as much. So we're doing it independent. If the associations want to come and they want to spread the word, by all means, we would encourage that. But we're not limiting it just to associations, because more voices matter. When it comes to the affordability, really the only tool that the city has right now to ensure an affordability limit is the pilot, the payment in lieu of taxes, but that can only be used until recently with MSHDA-funded projects. So that's why you see it with the Ruth Parks, the Annikas, things like that. Legislation has changed. So the city, as I understand it, is working with the city attorney to draft a pilot ordinance that you don't have to have that tool from the city tied to MSHDA funding. But if we want that to be even more successful, we got to put these zoning changes in place so that they can be applicable. So that's part of the conversation that the city commission will be having, is how and when they want that tool to be applicable in housing. And the last thing, to David's point, please take some time, read those resources that are at the end of the story map. There's so much information in there. The think tanks, the research universities that have been doing this work, the data's out there. You know, and there's a reason why you're hearing the same recommendations, because that work's been done. And so that's why we're pursuing this.
I'm sorry, can I say one more thing? I have to say that the letters that we have gotten recently have changed in tone from 3 or 4 years ago. And what I hear from people now is less fear, more understanding of the problems that we're facing, and more questions. And I liked that somebody came up and said, I actually have questions, I don't have a comment. And so those are good for us to hear. And again, I recommend emailing for those or coming into the office to talk, to find out specific answers to your questions, I think, are important. So I actually love the tone of the letters that are coming in. They are reasonable, they're well thought out, and they, for me, express less fear and more curiosity. How is this going to work? And I think that's a good thing.
Any other, Chief Teller?
Right, thank you. Yeah, regarding the letters, I've got a couple of letters this past week that I almost printed off and stuck on my wall because they were markedly different and actually offered a lot of really clever and really reasonable solutions to some of the things that the Planning Commission faces. But if I can go back to the neighborhoods, we've recently had a couple that formed up, and the city staff, or excuse me, the city management teams assigns a staff member to each neighborhood. And I've been assigned to Central because that's the neighborhood I live in. And we go to those meetings and we answer as many questions as we can. And if we can't, we write them down. We bring them back to city staff, whichever department that question was related to. And we say, here, this was brought up last night, and here's the person, and here's their phone number, or here's their email. So that's a conduit that can be used to answer not just questions about what we're talking about tonight, but any questions. You know, it's that personal contact, and it's been my experience going to other neighborhoods that there are several city commission elected officials that attend those meetings on their own time, and also some city planning commission members that attend those meetings on their own time to also provide like instant information. If you got a question, they're right there, and they can help you. But it's always been frustrating that we've had we have some neighborhood associations that have been in place for years, but there's still large areas of our city that are not organized in that fashion. And I feel if they were, we could better have those conversations. And when things are coming over the hill on the horizon, we could push information out and say, hey, we're going to be talking about these zoning things. And that would at least land in that neighborhood and be disseminated among the residents through their information contacts. So we're not relying on one form of communication. We have several different ways to get that message out so that we can have maybe like 60 people here tonight instead of maybe like 20 or so. And that would be awesome because you know, we live here, we pay taxes, we should have a voice. And we as a commission are constantly trying to find a good way to help overcome that obstacle. And the listening sessions, right, are one of the latest things that were developed, and that was based upon the tree canopy and the parks management project that we had at the library, and that went, you know, we got a lot of information there. So we're constantly trying to figure out how to connect with those people that, you know, maybe they're working 2 jobs and they don't have a lot of time, but if they got if we can get an email or if they have time to read like a half a page flyer, at least they could be informed and make that choice whether they want to attend or not, or communicate with us or not. Yeah, I'd rather have them make the choice than not have the opportunity to make the choice. But anyway, that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
We attend all those meetings without getting any per diems, by the way, just FYI, or health insurance or pay, none of that. So we will be going to days and days of meetings without any of that.
I'm scheduled for, I'm going to be attending both the Slabtown and the Boardman neighborhood meetings pretty
Is there
soon.
a problem if we all show up? I mean, I have them all
That
down
would
on
be
my
a
calendar.
quorum. We cannot do that.
We can't?
Not without without posting it as a public meeting.
So should we be signing up for which ones we're going to? I've got them all
I
down.
can stand outside and look through the window, right?
Yeah.
Yes, if we don't speak, but.
Should we be telling you what meetings?
Yeah.
You can send me an email tonight and I'll look at it.
Okay.
Yeah, unless there's
Or we could send a
5
grid
of
and
you
people
coming
would
to the
sign up
same
for.
one.
To the same one.
I was going to go to all of them. I mean, most
Oh,
of
no,
them.
I thought, not the listening sessions. That is a posted official meeting. We could all show
we
up
can.
for
Oh, we
those.
can't.
Yes.
I'm talking about those.
I thought you were talking about the neighborhood association meetings, which is what I was talking about.
No, I'm talking about these listening. We could all show up for these listening. Okay,
Yes,
got it.
Yes, those
Thank
are
you.
all posted official meetings. We
Got
can.
it, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so any other comments from commissioners? I think we've had public comment today.
Thank the public for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, for coming here, speaking, listening. Please send emails, please send, articles, anything that you have related to this. We value more information. We want to take everything into consideration as we look at these potential changes. Commissioner Duturi.
So I do want to say one thing, and it's to Sean and Laura. When you open the map, the interactive maps where you're supposed to scroll, it doesn't work in Safari. It has to be in Chrome.
Okay.
I was playing with it a lot because that's my job, and I just couldn't get it to work.
Okay, we'll look into that.
Yeah.
Works on my Safari.
Oh, weird. Oh,
Do
then
we
maybe
wanna
it's
adjourn?
operator error.
This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
It worked on your Safari? Weird. Yes.
I'm not sure. For the my blood boils.
Yes.
And I wanted to cry. And I thought I might
Thanks for coming. It's good to have your voice and face.
Tim, that's the right attitude to take, too. Let us take the heat is the right answer.
Did it just
That
a
was
month
good.
ago.
You were good. I know. That's exactly right.